Believe it or not, it has been 25 years since the legacy of Kain's Soul Reaver first came out, and now we have the Soul Reaver 1 and 2 remasters launching on December the 10th, where Aspyr have taken on the unenviable task of celebrating the 25th anniversary of one of the most beloved series in existence. And a thanks to the publisher for providing the review code. There is so much to go through, so many visual changes, loads to talk about in terms of performance in both docked and handheld, and this is arguably one of Aspyr's most impressive remasters to date, clearly treating the source material with a ton of respect. So right off the bat, you can rest easy, but will Raziel be reaving on your Switch? My name is Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Hit all the buttons, tickle all the things. Now, let's find out. This is one of those videos where we should start with visuals and performance. We've seen the remastered moniker used for a number of games where very little seems to have actually been changed, just a simple upres. In a recent interview with PlayStation blog, Chris Bashar detailed the many changes that they've gone through since the game's first released. Chiefly, Crystal Dynamics provided the source code so they had the proper base to work from. From there, they were able to massively increase the resolution of the game so that it runs at native resolution across all platforms, and it's the same team that worked on the Tomb Raider 1 to 3 remastered editions, with them stressing that they wanted to retain the original game almost in its entirety while simply improving naturally over the original elements. Alongside the original engine, they also had a complete set of assets, and we see a return of the ability to return from the original assets back to the modern with the press of a button. This is always nice, and it adds a lot to the experience, essentially meaning that no one can complain about those changes made because you can always go back to the old ones. When the game boots, you'll be presented with a number of different options. Both the Soul Reaver 1 and 2 games are accessible from here, but you'll also notice an extra options section which takes you into some of the various materials that Aspyr have gathered, from the more obvious such as an audio player allowing you to play the soundtrack to the entire script of both games so you can trawl through in detail, and a section that covers the lore of both of those titles with maps and imagery, and a huge section of concept art, never before seen pre-release materials, but perhaps most notable due to the time constraints of the original release. There were areas of the game that weren't ever accessible or never made it into the final build, and Crystal Dynamics have provided information for those, as well as that source code, enough so that Aspyr have been able to physically recreate or re-implement those areas. There's a contextual menu that will take you into each of them. It'll give you an overview of what the area was originally intended for, and some of these are very core things that they had to remove, like originally there were shrines essentially for different elemental abilities that Raziel would acquire in the world. You can actually go and visit them, things like fire, water, air, and the fact that you can explore these areas that you never previously would have done. That's partly why I say this is some of the best work that Aspyr have ever done. They've also included a number of videos. These were so interesting. I ended up spending several hours just watching through. They include outtakes of the voice actors, and it really shows you the thinking behind a lot of those late 90s adventure games where the focus was so heavily on narrative and story. Perhaps that's an element that's been lost in later games, and then we've seen begin to come back in with things like God of War, and people treat it like it's the first time that's ever happened. For Soul Reaver fans, these outtakes alone are almost worth the price of entry, featuring Michael Bell as Raziel, Simon Templeton as Kain, and Tony J as the Elder God. We often talk about the quality of voice acting, but this stuff was outstanding.
Ah, my wayward child returns.
Having unearthed more than you'd like, I suspect. What am I to make of these ruins that litter the land, and these
As you can see from the frame rates, the game is running at 60 frames per second without a slight hitch. This is the same for both docked and handheld modes, and the texture resolution and overall quality of the image seems to have been significantly improved, while as the developers intended, retaining every aspect of the original. The improvements to the engine include lighting and shadow improvements. Even if you were to compare this now side by side with some more modern Nintendo Switch games at least, I think it would hold up. It's an artistically great game. Load time times are also not an issue. You can load into and out of stages very quickly. Visually, I did notice some issues with the game. There are a few misaligned textures and a little misaligned geometry. I don't know if that was in the original game. What it amounts to is seeing slight splits between certain conjoined geometric items. They feel fitting for the time, but perhaps they could polish those out. But another visual aspect that they have included, or in fact built into the game using the engine, are skyboxes. The reason they didn't have those is because you didn't used to be able to look up. Aspyr have worked to implement the code necessary to enable the controls to be completely changed. Back in the day where you'd be using the D-pad to control the character, now you'll use the left analog stick and the right stick is used to shift the camera left and right in the XY axis, but also slightly up and down with the Y. It does feel a little sluggish, but they have also added the option to reverse the axis independently for both X and Y, which I know a lot of you will appreciate. The fact that they made skyboxes just so you could look up though, that's a great addition. Another change that was originally supposed to be in the games was a day and night cycle in some of the exterior locations. A really nice little subtle change that you may not even notice at first. Cutscenes have had a heavy makeover as well with higher fidelity models, and according to that interview they had to do some serious behind the scenes digging to find all of those. I will pop a link to that in the description because it's excellent. The character has had a model change and improvement as well. You'll notice that it's more akin to the pre-rendered cutscenes and looks much cleaner. It's lit quite differently, with the most notable changes coming from the cape that adorns Raziel. They also added in a glow to his eyes, as well as the Wraith Blade, essentially to showcase the lighting improvements, and you can also see it from the shadows on the ground, which are real-time shadows. It's not just Raziel who's had a bit of a physical makeover though, it's also the enemies and the boss models. They've significantly improved the models of the boss fights. They look so much cleaner and with a lot more detail. They've created the look of bump mapped textures on the skin of those. The stated goal by the producer is that they wanted to create the experience that you remember rather than the one that you actually played, and I think they've nailed that visually. It's a prime example where listening to the community has been the #1 aim, and as far as the visuals and performance go, they've achieved it. Sound and audio, I'm not sure if they were able to remaster or upscale the audio, or if it was already good enough, but as you can hear, the game sounds brilliant.
You're just as fatalistic as he is.
Death comes for us all, Raziel. It's just a matter of time.
The story then, for those who haven't played them, it essentially goes like this. The titular Kain, the leader of these vampires, with Raziel being a lieutenant. Over the eons, they evolve and gain new abilities, and Kain is jealous of something that happens, essentially murdering Raziel, tossing him into a pit and leaving him for dead. Eons later, he rises to reap his revenge, and that's where the game begins. Now, I won't tell you the start of the second game, because it will be a huge spoiler for everything that happens here, but both are filled with numerous lengthy cutscenes, and the world, both in terms of delivery as well as visuals, are filled with lore and story. They're great games, and even better, if it's the first time you're playing them, you're getting the best version. The game plays out like an action adventure that has a lock-on mechanic. You can perform light and heavy attacks, and later you'll unlock new abilities and of course gain the Wraith Sword and other weapons. You can pick up weapons from around the world, so you can grab torches off the wall, spears, and you'll need those because enemies won't die unless you burn them or impale them. While the combat does feel a little bit clunky, it was a little ahead of its time with things like a dodge mechanic and even a durability for some of those early weapons. They can be thrown as well to impale the enemy from a distance, and it's not entirely devoid of strategy, because if you've got nothing to kill them with early on, you'll either have to evade them or find somewhere to murder them by throwing them against spikes on a wall or into an open fire. Rather than a traditional leveling system, to improve your character, you'll have to defeat your former vampire brethren, reaping their souls by holding a button down, and through doing so you will gradually gain more power. Throughout the game you'll unlock various powers of the Wraith, and there are a couple of enemy clans where you can only kill them by taking their soul. If you don't, even if you've impaled them, remove that blade and they'll come back to life. It's very cool. Raziel can also step between realms. There's a heavy emphasis on platforming and puzzle platforming, albeit through pushing blocks, traversing platforms, but there's a decent level of puzzle to this because he'll need to step through to an alternate realm which may change the geometry, allowing him access to new areas, but within within this shadow realm, he's unable to interact and physically move items. It was really clever at the time, and again it still holds up. How often do we see re-releases or new games where the air quotes improvements involve collecting a bunch of keys or just flipping switches? You will unlock a warp system allowing you to move quickly between all of the areas, and Raziel can pull himself up over ledges and even swim. As with many late 90s games, or just 90s adventures in general, navigation could be a bit tricky. What Aspyr have done is added in a full map as well as an in-game compass, so that it's much easier to find your next objective. I distinctly remember being stuck for ages, so that's a great touch. This is something that didn't exist in the original release at all, and that map of Nosgoth was co-created by Aspyr, Crystal Dynamics, and members of the Legacy of Kain community. Price-wise, well, we're looking at £26.99 on sale in the US, but that does end very shortly. I know for our review code, there was a delay on the UK region codes. For an RRP of $29.99, you're getting 2 full games, a bunch of remastered content, and it's the same price I believe they charged for the Tomb Raider Remastered bundle. With the amount of work that's gone into it, I cannot be too upset. I'm sure there will be people that feel it's too expensive, but I'm not one of them. The game fits into 10.3 gigabytes, and it's all managed from one icon. You don't have 2 icons for the individual games, and as far as I know, you cannot purchase them individually either. Now, I do believe there will be a physical available, and certainly that's going to be, I think, on PlayAsia. We have a discount for that, by the way, in the description. I'm not sure about the other physicals. You'll have to let me know in the comments. Overall, I've been really pleased with this remaster. I was able to find a couple of issues, including a slightly balked skybox and some misaligned geometry, but its successes far outweigh its failures, and it gets a SwitchUp score of 87%. Are you going to be picking this one up? Is your backlog about to expand? I'd be keen to know how many of you played the original down in the comments. I'd love to see Blood Omen come across. That was a cracking game. Thanks to our Patreons, our members, all of you that enjoy the content, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. See ya!